All right, we are back with a new video, and today we'll be beginning my coverage for Australian Survivor Blood versus Water. Obviously, this season has been announced for months now, and we've gotten information about who's on the cast. And back on Sunday is when we finally got our full cast pictures as well as cast bios. And at this point, I feel pretty comfortable making a preseason power ranking for how likely I think it is that each of these players are going to win. And if you're new to this channel, what I like to do for these is basically rank each of the players given the information that we've gotten from the preseason and rank them based on how likely they are to win the game. And this was tough for Australian Survivor because I feel like unlike other iterations of Survivor like South Africa or US, we don't get a whole lot of information about these players, like what they're thinking going into the game. I feel like all we get is a couple sentences and some pictures to really go off of. So a lot of this is going to be highly speculative. And even when I have more information, I still tend to be wrong. I mean, this is the preseason after all, but enough rambling. Let's get right into the list. So, starting off at number 24, the player I think is the least likely to win this season is Nina Twine, obviously Sandra's daughter. I don't think Nina's winning this game. And actually, I think there's a very real chance she's voted out before Sandra. She's someone that has a target of being connected to Sandra, the two-time winner, while lacking the upside of being a meat shield. Granted, I don't think this will be as much of a strategic calculation on Australian Survivor than it would be on Survivor US, but I still think it'll carry with her. Now, to Nina's credit, she's at least watched Australian Survivor and she's talked in her bio about the importance of lowering her threat level. But at the end of the day, her connection to Sandra is really going to hurt her, as I think people will be scared about both of them getting to the swap together or let alone the merge. So, for those reasons, I'm not too confident about Nina's chances. I would love to see her do well, but for right now, I have her here at number 24. Now we're moving on to number 23, and it's literally someone I just mentioned. It is Sandra. Yeah, Sandra is on Australian Survivor now. But yeah, she's not winning this game either. I mean, obviously, you have the fact that she has the reputation of being a two-time winner. I mean, even if these people haven't watched Survivor US, they'll at least know about that title at least. But even beyond that, the fact that she isn't Australian will probably hurt her in the long run. Now, with that said, however, I don't think she'll be an early boot. We can turn to Game Changers and Winners at War, where she at least made it to the swap and people were willing to use her as a shield for the early portions of the game. And looking at her tribe this season, I can certainly see people like Sam or Croc use her as a number and a bigger target as they lay the groundwork for their games moving forward. I also think she could benefit from this cast not being super fans and possibly not understanding the ins and outs of her gameplay. But at the end of the day, I feel like the label of two-time winner will be with her the entire season, and I don't think her gameplay style will be effective enough to get the target off her back. Again, I wouldn't be surprised if she made it at least to the swap, but I feel like her getting to the end will be such a tall bar for her that I don't think she'll ultimately do it, and I have her here at number 23. So now moving on to number 22, we have the first Australian player on the list, and obviously the rest of the list is Australian players. But at number 22, we have Kate, who is Andy's sister. Kate is another person I'm not too sure about. Now, like I said, she's Andy's sister, and with that, you assume that she at least watched some of the show. However, I'm not getting the impression from her bio that she's a cutthroat player strategically, as Andy might be. Sure, she talks about not having a game plan and that she's flexible, but I don't know if she'll play that active of a game. And on top of that, if the people on her tribe don't trust Andy, then I can easily see her getting picked off as a way of weakening him. I think a lot of her game will depend on how people perceive Andy, and obviously we'll talk about him a bit later. But I feel like if he doesn't do well, or if people on her tribe perceive Andy to be this big threat, then she could easily be voted off. And even aside from that, she just seems like someone who I don't wouldn't have much confidence in anyway. So for those reasons, I have her here at number 22. Now we're moving on to number 21, and we have someone pretty similar to Kate, and probably someone who I probably have less confidence in inherently than Kate. But I feel like the person they're with is probably slightly less likely to make them a target. And here we have Chrissy, who is Croc's sister-in-law. And again, I don't feel too confident about Chrissy. She admits in her bio to not knowing much about the game and seems to imply that she's playing more for Croc than for herself, which gives me a lot of concerns. And again, I mean, her partner is a professional athlete, and obviously, that'll make her vulnerable to being targeted. Granted, probably not as likely as Andy, who's at least played Australian Survivor. With that, probably has a reputation for playing the game. Where I feel like Croc might be a bit more revered going to the game, or at least based on what we've seen previously from professional athletes on Australian Survivor. Now, Chrissy talks a little bit about wanting to be in the middle and coming off as a mother figure, but even then, I don't know how much of that will translate into good gameplay. I mean, I could definitely see her making it far in the game, but probably not playing super well. I mean, obviously, we'll have to see what happens. And again, plus with Crocker as her loved one, that could set up a situation where she could be targeted if he gets too out in front. So on the whole, I feel like Chrissy is someone who I could see a world where she does relatively well, but at least what we're getting from her bio, I'm not feeling too great about her. And because of that, I have her here at number 21. Now we're moving on to number 20, and this is someone I feel like has a lot of potential to be an early boot, but they at least talk a bit more about their gameplay style, and that is Khan. Now, Khan is interesting as he competed on Master Chef. Now, I'd never seen Master Chef, I mean, let alone the Australian version of it. But from the articles I've read, it seems like he was a pretty prominent figure on that show and relatively popular at that. Regardless, I don't think he's going to do well. Now, first, there's the factor of his reputation, possibly putting a target on his back. I don't think that alone will do it, or at least not initially. I think his personality will be enough to garner him some early allies, and I think he'll won't be initially talked about as the boot unless he's physically weak. Now, strategically is where I have some question marks. Now, he talks about in his bio about that he wants to play aggressively, find idols, and orchestrate blindsides, but he also says that he has no strategy going in, that he wants to have fun and see what happens, and then he wants to make dumb decisions. And to me, that sounds like he has no idea what he's doing and that he's going to try making big moves just for the sake of making big moves. And while he could plow through a few rounds doing that, I feel like he's going to get targeted sooner rather than later. I feel like he might end up blowing up his game. But with that said, it's just the bio preseason. And I know that obviously people don't always do what they say in those bios, but considering that's all we have and we don't actually have interviews or anything else to go off of, I can only assume that that's what he's thinking about going into the game, which obviously isn't great. But if he is able to play more mellow and bide his time, then I think he could potentially do well. But for right now, the risk of him blowing up his game or just being a early target is the reason I have him here at number 20. Now we're moving on to number 19, and we have someone who I don't think is going to be an early boot. I mean, there's obviously the potential, but if I were a betting man, I'd say this person would probably make at least the swap and probably the merge, but I'd feel like they don't really have much of a path to the end. That is Ben, who is Shayel's partner. I think Ben's going to fit this big alpha male archetype we've seen in previous seasons, like people like Matt Rogers and Henry from 2017, or Simon and Emmett from Brains versus Brawn. He talks a lot about being someone that stands out in a crowd and someone that wants to be a challenge beast. And historically, we've seen these people do relatively well on Australian Survivor, but obviously have a ton of trouble getting to the end. And I feel like that'll be the case for Ben this season. I don't think he'll do much to minimize his threat level, and while he seems like he'll garner some early allies, there's no way this guy's getting isn't getting targeted later on. I mean, I think he'll do relatively well in the pre-merge, maybe even become the leader figure if he's able to win out over some of the other people we'll be talking about. But I feel like by the time it gets down to like the early merge section of the game, or even later in the merge, like he'll probably be seen as the leader figure for his group if he's able to get to that point and probably be targeted as a result. So there's that going on. And even in the pre-merge, like while I think he'll do well, I mean, there's also the fact that there's some other people on his tribe, the blood tribe, who fit that archetype. And there's obviously potential for him to fight it out between those people. I mean, there's that possibility, but I think more than likely he'll probably try to work with some of those people at least to begin with. So I don't think that'll be too much of a problem, even if it is a possibility. So on the whole, like I said, I think Ben is someone who should do well in the pre-merge, but I feel like he'll have a hard time getting to the end. And because of that, I have him here at number 19. Now we're moving on to number 18, and we have Amy, Khan's sister. I'm not too feeling too great about her. I mean, while she seems like someone who will be all right socially, her bio doesn't tell me she's all in on the strategic element. Primarily, she says she's most looking forward to the quote unquote whole experience, which tells me she might be viewing this more as a personal journey than a strategic game. And on top of that, I feel like while she'll be all right socially, again, I could see her fitting this mold as someone who could be targeted pre-merge for being too likable or too much of an under the radar threat. I mean, again, it depends on how she comes off, but I think there's that potential for her. Now, with that said, I like how she talks about willing to break out of her brother's shadow, implying she could be underestimated. And even beyond that, if Calm becomes a problem later on, she could at least dissociate from him somewhat. Do I think she'll do that? Probably not. I mean, that's obviously assuming they even get to the swap together. So I don't think that'll be too big of a concern, but it's just the lack of information strategically. And plus, there's questions about whether she's prioritizing the right things to play a strong strategic game. Because of that, I have her here at number 18. Now we're moving on to number 17. And really, these next two, I mean, they're pretty much part of a pair. And what's really annoying about the 10 play website is that they gave both these people the exact same bio. Now, I'm not sure if they realized it or not, but it's literally the exact same bio word for word. So it's very hard to separate these two, really tell like what they're thinking individually. But I had to rank them nonetheless. At number 17, I have Jordan, obviously part of a pairing with Josh. And again, there's not much to go off with him. I mean, the main thing about him is that he at least seems stronger physically. He is a personal trainer. So I think that's something that could help him out. However, I feel like he also has potential to be an early boot. I mean, just looking at him compared to the other people on the tribe, I could see him falling on the outs potentially. And even beyond that, I mean, the fact that he is stronger could lead him to be targeted later on in the game. That's not great. I have him here at number 17. And along those lines, at number 16, we have his partner, Josh. Now, the main reason I had Josh a bit above him is that I feel like he is slightly more likely to integrate within a majority, and I think he might be slightly better at lowering his threat level. And even beyond that, I feel like Josh might be a more consistent player than Jordan, to where I think there are fewer options for Josh to be an early boot than Jordan. And that's the main reason I have both of them here in number 16 and 17. However, I had Josh just a little bit higher. Now we're moving on to number 15, and we actually have one of the returning players on the season, or at least returning from Australian Survivor, and that is Andy. Yeah, they put Andy on the season for some reason. And going in, I feel okay about him. Now, obviously, we saw him on Champions versus Contenders 2, playing this outwardly strategic game that caused him to be on the outs for much of the pre merge. And of course, he ended up being the merge boot that season, as pretty much nobody trusted him. And looking at his bio, it sounds like he's going to take a more relaxed approach and hopefully improve his social game. It seems like he recognizes what went wrong the first time and that he's going to try to rectify that. The question for him is how effective he'll be at that and whether the people that saw him play his first time will give him that chance. Honestly, I'm gonna have to see it in action before I can go all in on him. So that's a big reason I have him relatively lower on the list. However, if I had to guess, I would assume they would give him that chance. It seems like while he was this hourly strategic player, he wasn't very effective in the game. And I feel like because of that, people could underestimate him a bit. And that if he does take this more relaxed approach, people will give him that chance. So I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt there, but I realize there is a possibility that they won't. So because of that, I have him here at number 15. Now we're moving on to number 14, and we actually have another returning player from the season, and that is Sam from Australian Survivor 2017. And again, she's one of the more interesting people to talk about. I mean, looking back at 2017, she started off in the majority, being the driving force at that first tribal, but obviously she made herself too big of a threat, largely due to her relationship with Mark, who we'll be talking about later, to the point where Henry threw the challenge to target them. I mean, that's not great. And plus, given that people on her tribe, I mean, she's on the blood tribe, I think she has early boot potential again. But if she's able to make it through those rounds, then I think she'll be all right. I think she is someone who definitely has more potential than what her first season demonstrated. I mean, I think people tend to forget that she was in charge of that first round and that part of the reason why she was targeted was because she was too domineering. Whereas I feel like most people, when they think of Sam, they think of, oh, well, she got in the showmance with Mark, and that's why she got targeted. Whereas I feel like she definitely is more capable as a player than that. And that I feel like through that, she might be able to get under the radar to a certain extent. But at the end of the day, I mean, a lot of it will depend on what ends up happening on the season. And I feel like she isn't on the best starting tribe in the world to where I think she could still be targeted. But again, I feel like if she's able to get through some of those early obstacles, then I think she could be very dangerous in the game. So because of that, I have her here at number 14. Now we're moving on to number 13, and we have a bit of an interesting player to talk about, and that is Croc. Now, Croc is obviously a celebrity figure, and he's a former rugby player. And with that comes a potential target. I mean, like Ben, I wouldn't be surprised if he fits into this alpha male archetype, trying to be the leader of his alliance. But what makes things even more interesting is that they're on the same tribe, him and Ben. So naturally, I have to wonder if they'll end up working together or if there'll be a power struggle between the two. I assume the former. I mean, they're probably going to try to work together at least initially, and I don't think Ben would be dumb enough to actually try to target someone that fits that similar archetype and someone that could be a meat shield for him. However, Ben ends up trying to target him. I actually think Croc would have the upper hand. I mean, I have more faith in Croc to maneuver the game strategically than Ben, or at least based on this bio. But at the end of the day, it's hard for me to see this guy getting to the end. I mean, we've seen professional athletes come into Australian Survivor before, and they have I'd say better track record than people would assume. But I mean, they rarely win the game. I mean, obviously, there's the upside of him being Matt Rogers, someone who is a leader figure for his tribe, but eventually gets blindsided. But obviously, there's Gavin from Brains versus Brawn, who I thought would have been a similar mold, but was obviously a very early boot and someone who was very passive in the game. I mean, I don't think Croc will be that. I think he'll definitely be better than that. But obviously, he'll be someone who is targeted down the stretch and someone who I think is probably better positioned to be the actual leader of the tribe than Ben is, which is a reason I have him above Ben on this power ranking. But at the end of the day, it's hard for me to see him getting to the end unless he wins out. But because of that, I'm here at number 13. Now we're moving on to number 12, and I feel like this person could go either way. I mean, I could see this person being an early boot. I could see this person making a very deep run in the game. And I mean, I could also see them just doing all right. But here at number 12, we have Sophie. Now, while she isn't as knowledgeable at the game as her partner KJ is, I think she can be capable of the game. Now, where I have some concerns is her background as a company director. I mean, obviously, that could potentially lead her to her struggling to fit in. But also she talks about how she'll try to play under the radar despite being this more out in front personality. Now, while I think she'll have some success doing that, I still worry that her lack of game knowledge could hurt her. And obviously there's the question of whether she'll be targeted early given that she's on the blood tribe, which I think will be definitely the more dangerous tribe for people like her to be in. However, I think if she's able to get past that, then I think she could do relatively well in the game. But until we see it, I feel like 12 is about as high as I can put her. Now we're moving on to number 11, and we have another out in front figure and another person from the blood tribe. We have David. Now, again, he's again could someone who is more of this dominant personality, and I could see him coming off as intense and pushy. However, I think what puts him above people like Ben or Croc is that I think he's more strategic and cutthroat. He's probably the most of those three that I just mentioned, and I think through that he could be all right in the game. And I also think, unlike those other two, I think he could definitely play under the radar better than those other two I just mentioned. And I feel like he can mask his more cutthroat nature with a bright exterior. I think those things can make him very effective at the game. However, again, part of the reason I have him here at number 11 is that he is in the blood tribe, which I think probably isn't the best tribe for him to be on. And even aside from that, I mean, there is still that potential of him not coming off as genuine to certain people. I think he could definitely come off as threatening if he doesn't contain himself. However, compared to these other guys that we just talked about, Ben and Croc, I feel like he has the most potential to do so, and definitely the most potential to hide behind bigger threats to where he's less likely to be targeted himself. So, because of that, I have him here at number 11. Now we're moving on to number 10, and we have another player that I think could do relatively well in the game, and that is Shayel. Now, Shayel seems like the person that will probably have some early success on her tribe, given her physical strength and apparent social ability. Now, where I think she could get caught up is if Ben becomes a major threat down the line due to his out of front nature. I mean, if Ben becomes this major figure later on in the game, then I can see her being sniped out. Now, realistically, I don't think that'll be much of a factor in the pre-merge, or at least not the pre-swap. However, if both Ben and Shayel are still in the game and they're closely aligned, then I could see that possibility arising where she is sniped out of the game. And honestly, looking at her tribe, I could see her building some allies, namely with the more physical men, Mark and Jordie. I think through that she could have a lot of success in the game. Will I think she win the game though? I think it's unlikely right now, or at least she's not a top contender. But I like her, and I think she has potential within the game. And because of that, I have her here at number 10. Moving on to number 9. I mean, we have another player who, like Sophie, definitely has more variance in terms of their game. I mean, she could definitely be an early boot. She could definitely make it very far in the game. And I feel like a lot of that is due to just not seeing her in action. But I feel like just based on what we know so far, I feel like putting Michelle here at number 9. Again, Michelle is someone I think could do well in the game. Now, it's unclear whether she's a super fan like her twin sister, Amel. I feel like she could be quite capable in the game. And I think she's someone that could understand people well. And I feel like that'll translate into the game. Now, the main question I have for her is what her perception will be, because until I actually see it, I mean, I could definitely see a scenario where she struggles to fit in right out the bat. I mean, and through that, she could be seen as a weakness for her tribe. I mean, obviously, we don't know what she's like physically, but that's definitely a concern for her. But she also has potential to pick up some allies on the Blood Tribe. I mean, Sandra's there with her. I could see her aligning well with Michelle. I mean, with Sandra. And even aside from that, I think if she's able to get through some of those early rounds, and I think we could see a truly great player in her. And I feel like she could be very effective in the game. It's just the lack of information that these cast bios provide that make me more hesitant about her. So because of that, I have her here at number 9. Now we're moving on to number 8, and I kind of went back and forth with this person. I kind of wonder, is this person too high? I mean, am I giving them too much credit? But I figured 8 was a good place for them. So at number 8, we actually have the highest placing returning player on the season. We have Mark, obviously from Australian Survivor 2017. And Mark is someone I think would have potential on the return. I mean, we saw him play in 2017, where he was put on the outs due to his relationship with Sam, blindsided when Sam went home, and tried orchestrating a flip on Henry and Jackie. He even managed to get Luke and Jericho on his side. Now, obviously, that wasn't the best move for them, but still, he was able to get them on his side. Now, obviously, it doesn't work out, and now he's with Sam again. And through that, I worry that that'll make him a target. Although I still feel like Sam is in more immediate danger than he will be. I mean, I feel like that blood tribe is a very dangerous place for Sam to be in. Whereas Mark is on the water tribe where he probably won't have as many people targeting him right off the bat. I feel like he'll be good at challenges while possibly being underestimated strategically. Like, I think, like Sam, the fact that he was an early boot on his original season will probably make people more likely to underestimate him strategically. And I think the fact that he wants to work on his social game is another credit to him. I feel like if he's able to like back off a bit from his more physical side, then I think he could be very effective in the game. Now, again, there are still question marks like whether I'm giving Mark too much credit or whether I think he'll be that effective at playing a better social game, or whether him and Sam will be this big target in the game. So those are big question marks that leave him outside the top five, but I still feel relatively good about Mark going in. He's here at number eight. Now we're moving on to number seven, and we're kind of moving on to an interesting group of people. These are definitely people who definitely have the feel of being alpha males, like that we talked about earlier, and definitely people that are capable physically. However, I have more confidence in their ability to downplay that or possibly play more under the radar type of game. But at number seven, we have Jay, obviously Alex's brother-in-law. Now, again, just looking at his bio, he definitely seems to be in pretty good shape physically. Seems to be stronger than Alex, as we hear in his cast bio that Jay is training Alex for the game. Now, while I'm not sure whether he's a super fan like Alex, I mean, he seems to understand the importance of the social game. I think he'll be able to integrate well pretty early on without overplaying. I could definitely see him being this triple threat, someone who's good physically, good socially, and good strategically. Well, we'll have to see about that third part, but I feel like he won't be this out of in front figure that Ben or Croc might be. Now, some of that is probably because he's on the same tribe as them, but I still feel like he'll be able to integrate well into the majority and not be targeted as a result. And I just feel good about Jay's overall ability. Now, again, I think a lot of it will come down to his strategic ability, whether he'll be able to make the optimal moves to get himself into this good of a position. Because I feel like if he doesn't, then he could definitely be targeted later on in the game. But I feel like if he's able to play optimally and he's able to align with the right people, then I think he can make it very deep into the game without being targeted, despite being a physical threat. So those are things that make me feel good about Jay going in. But I feel like these six people we'll be talking about definitely have more potential than him. And because of that, I have him here at number seven. Now we're moving on to number six, and we have someone pretty similar to Jay. And believe it or not, this is actually the highest ranking person on the Blood Tribe, which kind of speaks to what I think of the Water Tribe. But at number six, we have Jesse. Now, like I said, Jesse's very similar to Jay. I mean, now he is the youngest person on the cast. I mean, and he seems pretty good physically, which on the Blood Tribe will certainly help him. Now, what I find interesting is that he talks about wanting to make big moves and not be a number, but is also someone that doesn't want to act too quickly. And I think him taking that back seat will help him, especially if these bigger guys start going after each other. Like like Jay, I mean, I can see him being this good person physically. I mean, we know that he's a triathlete, and I feel like he'll definitely be an asset to his tribe and challenges, but he's also someone who I think will be pretty good at the other elements of the game. The way I see him going is that he could very well be a more strategic Emmett. And I feel like if he's able to be that, then he'll be a very dangerous person in the game. But I feel like the five people we'll be talking about are probably people I have more confidence in, and definitely people that I think have a stronger chance of winning the game. But I would not be surprised if Jesse was a big figure on the season, and I have him here at number six. Now we're moving on to number five, and we don't have too much information about this person, but I still feel very confident about them. And here at number five, we have Jordie, or Jesse's brother. And like Jesse, I feel very confident about Jordie. I mean, he seems to get the importance of understanding people on a deeper level, and I can see him coming off as this very affable guy. And while he's probably not as physical as Jesse, I think he's still pretty good physically. I mean, he is a landscaper after all. Again, I don't know how well he'll do strategically, but I still have plenty of confidence in him. I feel like he will be able to just garner a lot of respect and a lot of allies, probably more so than Jesse. I think the thing about Jesse is that he is the youngest person on the cast, which I think could harm him. However, Jordy has a lot of that upside, but also someone who's a little older, probably has a bit more life experience, and definitely someone who I think could definitely command more respect than Jesse, which is a big reason I have him above him. And again, I feel like Jordy has the potential to do well on the season. And considering I give the advantage to the Water Tribe, I feel like that's definitely something that is also to his benefit as well. He's here at number five. Now we're moving on to number four, and this person definitely has the most variance of the top five people on the list. but I also feel like I have enough information to where I feel comfortable giving them the benefit of the doubt. And here at number four, we have Mel, the other twin sister. Now, while she's not without her concerns, I feel okay about Mel. She's one of the people that she says she's a super fan and talks about creating alliances and wanting to make big moves. And I feel like she could end up doing that. I mean, I think she'll be good enough socially to build the bonds needed to get further in the game. Now, with that said, I'm very curious to see if she ends up overplaying or perhaps even struggles to build bonds earlier on, which could cause her to get targeted. However, compared to the rest of the cast, she's someone I'm more confident in. I feel like she won't have that much trouble building bonds. And I think, unlike some people that you would think would be in her archetype, I think she definitely has the strategic chops in order to play an effective game. So I feel like through that, she'll definitely be someone who, if she's able to get a footing in the game, she could be very dangerous. Someone that's very likely to be underestimated, and someone who I think can play a game that's worthy of winning. So those are all things in Mel's credit. Now, can I see her struggling? Definitely. However, considering that she is a super fan, that she understands the game, at least on some level, I feel like number four is a decent place to put her, at least for the preseason. Now we're moving on to number three, and admittedly, we don't have a ton of information from this person based on their bio. However, I feel like given their archetype and given what how she appears, I feel like she's someone who's poised to do well. And here, number three, we have Briana. Now, I like Briana. I think she'll do relatively well socially. She explicitly mentions in her bio that she wants to be a social butterfly, and I don't think she'll be an early boot. Now, obviously, with people like her, I mean, obviously, there is the risk of being perceived as an under the radar threat. I don't think she'll be perceived as strategic enough to be perceived that way, although I could still see her being capable strategically. Now, at the end of the day, we don't know a ton about her strategically from her bio, although I wouldn't be surprised if she was just trying to downplay that in order to play a more effective game and definitely get into people's good graces. So I think those are all things to her credit. It's just the lack of information that really makes me hesitate to put her higher than number three. Although I would not be surprised if she ends up being a major contender for this season. Now we're moving on to number two. And admittedly, I feel like my number one is a pretty clear number one. Although this is obviously a pretty clear number two for me. And here, number two, we have Alex. Now, I like Alex a lot. I mean, he definitely checks off a lot of the boxes that I look for in my preseason assessment. I mean, he is a super fan. He talks about navigating through different social and strategic scenarios in his head. I feel like he'll definitely understand the game pretty well. Doesn't seem like the best physically, but also not the worst to where he'll be targeted early on. And also, he has his occupation that he could potentially play up to. I mean, he works as a warehouse worker. I think that's definitely something that he can definitely prop up to make people underestimate him. I think that's definitely something that'll lead to him playing an effective game. I feel like he'll be very effective at playing under the radar. I feel like he'll be rewarded more after a season with Jordan Haley, who are obviously very dominant and out in front figures, to where people are probably going to be looking for that sort of thing. Whereas I feel like Alex is definitely someone who can play under the radar, but also understand all of his strategic options and definitely make the optimal decision. Now, at the end of the day, it is Australian Survivor, and I mean, there aren't as many super fans competing as you would see on Survivor US. However, considering the fact that he explicitly mentions in his bio that he is a super fan, makes me think that he'll at least understands the game better than a lot of other people. And through that, I feel a lot of confidence in Alex's ability in the game. But there is one other person that I think will probably be more likely to win the game than him. So I have Alex here at number two. And now at number one, the person I think is the most likely to win Australian Survivor Blood versus Water is KJ. Now, I like KJ a lot, and she checks off a lot of the boxes I like to see. She's a super fan. She has meticulously studied the show. She talks about getting her hands dirty and being out in the wilderness. She used to be a flight attendant. Now, obviously, flight attendants historically have done pretty well on Survivor. I mean, it's obviously not a guarantee, but obviously the thinking there is that if you're a flight attendant, you're used to dealing with different types of people, which leads me to believe she'll be good enough socially. I feel like she should be able to integrate well into the majority. Now, she doesn't delve too deeply into strategy, but I still feel like she'll be very active in the game, trying to build connections along the way. And the thing about her is that she reminds me a lot of Haley from last season. Again, another super fan who was able to play a similar style of game as what KJ seems to be coming off as. And I could see that being a potential downside. I mean, because like assuming these people have watched the last season, then they'll probably be looking out for a Haley like figure to be targeting. However, I'm not entirely sure that's the case. I mean, I'm not sure that a lot of these people even are super fans who will be going after people like Haley or KJ. And if KJ is able to replicate like what Haley was able to do on Brain versus Water, I mean, minus her getting voted out, I think she'll be very effective in the game. And obviously, a big reason why I had Haley assessed so highly is because she had a lot of things going for her that would naturally make her a good player, regardless of what previous seasons have affected in terms of people wanting to look out for her in terms of playing the game. So I feel like KJ definitely has a lot of the same components there. I think she's aware of the pitfalls of being too similar to Haley and will probably try to play a different style of game. But I also feel like she's someone who, again, will just be able to, again, understand her options, make the optimal move, and have the social ability to build allies. So I feel like for all those reasons, I consider KJ the most likely person to win going into the season, and I consider her my winner pick. And there we go. That will do it for this preseason power ranking. Now, I guess I should talk a little bit about how the rest of the season will be covered. So, obviously, the thing about Australian Survivor is they air 3 episodes a week on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. Now, it's a bit ridiculous for me to make a power ranking after every single episode, especially if it's going to be invalidated after the next episode, which is probably the next day. So, considering that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make one power ranking each week, probably either on Thursday or Friday. And through that, it'll be covering 3 episodes each. So, the next power ranking will come after episode 3. The next week's power ranking will come after episode 6, and so on and so forth for the rest of the season. I feel like that's a good way of doing things, not just on my end, but also to give us a good enough sample size to get a sense of who the contenders really are. I think it'll be a lot of fun to cover the season. It'll be interesting to see how the community reacts to the season as well. So with that, that's the video. I mean, if you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe. Again, be on the lookout for Australian Survivor coverage. I'm still covering Amazing Race 33 as that's coming out. And we got other shows coming out soon, like Celebrity Big Brother, Survivor 42 is coming out relatively soon. I'll be around to cover those shows as well. But for now, that is the video. See ya.